I met Terrence in a hiking group out of Eugene. He wasn't the loud type or the know-it-all type. He just put in the miles, kept pace with whoever was next to him, and also carried more in his pack than he actually needed. And that last part is really what caught my eye. Only serious backpackers carry extra gear for others. It turns out we only lived a few blocks apart and he'd crossed paths without ever even meeting before. After that, it was maps and mileage and morning coffee before long trail. Heads by the end of the year, we were together, no dramatic Instagram proposal or anything like that. Just two people who could split weight, evenly walk in silence, and agree on when to set up camp. That kind of compatibility is rarer than love itself. Our usual thing was one or maybe two nighters load up our packs, pick a loop with some decent gain, and then get off trail for a night and hike back out. No hotels, no showers, no phones, organs. Got plenty of land for that sort of thing, especially when you get off the main highways. There's just this quiet to it that presses in around you. And I like that pressure, and I know Terrence did too. The trip that went bad was supposed to be one of the good ones. We'd both talked about hitting the backwoods east of Mount Washington for quite a while now, mid-fall. Just enough chill to keep the bugs down, but not so much snow that we'd be post-hauling. We found a trailhead that connected to some remote spurs, and we figured we'd bushwalk a little. If we had to spend the week before double-checking our gear, Tourson tent, fuel, headlamps, burbag, beans, hot dogs, whiskey, the works, we parked the lot on Wednesday morning, shouldered up, and then stepped off into the woods. It was quiet, real quiet. The dry leaf crunch kind of quiet, no other cars in the lot, which felt like an added bonus. Those first few miles were perfect mossy trunks. A little breeze, nothing but the sounds of our boots and the birds in the canopy. Around the 3 meters mark we stopped for a snack and to orient ourselves. The GPS was still good battery strong, and the sun hadn't really moved far enough to cause any kind of concern. We had another 3, maybe 4 miles into our intended campsite for the night. Terrence found a boulder to sit on and wolf down a protein bar while I filtered water from a nearby spring pool. Feels like we're the only 2 people left on Earth, he said. I nodded. Yeah, kind of wish we were. It was one of those days that makes you feel smug about not having kids or mortgages or dinner reservations. Just 2 people and 1,000 trees around them. We pushed on boots, spiding into the soft pine needle trailheads. Down against the slope, Terrence had this habit of counting out loud once the incline picked up, like he could will himself forward with the numbers I led him. I liked hearing his voice out there, like knowing he was still a few steps ahead, even if he never looked back to check on me. By our 6th mile, we figured we were within a half-mile of our marked camp. The sun had dropped a little bit, spilling amber light through the branches, but we weren't losing it fast. Still had time to settle in. Hey, I got to take a leak, Terrence said, slowing up. All right, don't get lost. I have. Choked. He nodded at me, then peeled off the trail and disappeared into the undergrowth. I dropped my pack and stretched my back a little, listening to the birds. 5 minutes went by, then 10. I called out once, figuring he was just taking his time, but I got no answer. And that's when the scream hit. It wasn't a startled yelp or panicked shout. It was a scream, full-throated, punched out of the gut. It was Terrence crying out for help. Help me. Help me. The words bounced off the trees and came from somewhere lower. I grabbed both packs, mine and his, then tore off through the woods in the direction. I heard his voice, heart thudding, ducking branches and sliding over loose dirt. I found him about 60 yards out, down inside this narrow ravine, maybe 12 foot deep, tangled in brush and rock. He was on his back, face pale, one leg bent all wrong. His ankle was lodged between 2 hunks of stone. It's stuck, he said, teeth grit against the pain. I slipped. It fucking popped. I climbed down carefully, trying to not make it worse. The rocks were slick, covered in a thin sheen of moss. I braced his leg and talked him through it. And when I twisted just right, the ankle came free. He howled out in pain, nearly passing out. We sat there for a while, breathing hard, his arms looped around my shoulder. Eventually, he could limp. Barely. It took him nearly an hour to get him back out of that ravine and back up to the trail. We were not going to make it that last half mile, not before nightfall. The slope was bad. The footing was worse, and Terrence couldn't even walk straight. We found a flat patch just off the trail, uneven, but serviceable and pitched. The tarp right there. I got a small fire going, split a can of beans between us, and used his pack as a footrest. The ankle was swelling up like a balloon, but it wasn't broken. He could still move the toes still. We weren't hiking out tonight. There's no way tomorrow. He said, rest tonight. I'll wrap it, take it slow. We'll be okay. I nodded, though my nerves had started whispering by then. Something about how quiet it was around us, and not that good kind of quiet. The fire gave off this soft pop and a hiss, and we leaned into the warmth, keeping ears peeled for rustles or snaps of twigs, signs of other hikers, signs that we weren't all alone. If somebody came through, we wanted to flag them down for help and pray to God that they had supplies of some kind. And just like that, we weren't alone. A stranger stepped out of the dark just as we finished our food. One moment nothing, then all of a sudden something moved at the edge of the firelight, just enough shadow to make us both freeze. And I honestly pissed a little. Evening, folks, the man said, raising one hand, who's tall and lean, wearing a hooded jacket and trail-worn pants. His boots were really dirty, crusted up with mud on the sides. Didn't mean to scare you all. I saw the firelight. Terrence spoke first. You're hiking at night. The man smiled. Through hiking, got a quota to make, got to push some mileage in the dark if I want to keep up with my plan. He stepped a little closer, not quite into the circle of the firelight, but close enough for me to see his face. Long nose, sharp chin, thick eyebrows like caterpillars, greasy hair sticking out of his hood. He looked around our camp like he was casing it. You guys mind if I sit for a minute? He asked Terrence, and I exchanged a glance. We weren't armed, and I didn't really like the idea of saying yes to the stranger. I just shrugged, because we didn't really have a good option here. Telling him no might just piss him off. We nodded, and he took a seat from across us. So you're just passing through? I asked. Yep, name's Cale. He said, sitting cross-legged. Notice your man here is kind of hobbling that a sprained twist. Terrence said, caught it in ravine. Cale leaned over and stared at the ankle like it was dead. That's pretty bad. Well, you're stuck out here now. I didn't like the way he said that. No pity, just an observation, like a man watching a mouse stuck in a trap. Are you able to call anybody? I asked. You got a phone, right? Cale then smiled wider than he should have. Nah, there's no service for miles, but I do have a satellite phone. My chest loosened a little. Would you be willing to let us use it just to call search and rescue? He tilted his head like he was thinking about it. Then he said, sure, I can do that. All you got to do is take your shirt off. The air cracked just like that. No hesitation, no humor. He was dead serious. Terrence sat up with his eyes narrow. What the fuck did you just say? Cale didn't move. You want the phone, that's the trade. I get to look, or maybe more if you're feeling generous. Could save you a whole lot of pain. Maybe your girl's into that, huh? I stood up. Get the fuck out of our camp. He then stood too, brushing dirt off his knees. To yourself, but you're helpless out here. He can't walk, and you're 6 millesi from the road. You'll come back later. Maybe you're feeling a little different. He turned and then disappeared in the trees like he lived out there. Terrence was breathing hard, adrenaline dumping. What the fuck was that, psycho? I said, a fucking psycho. We didn't sleep much. Every twig snap would make me jump, and somewhere around midnight, a rock landed near the fire, just rolling past the tent, then another, and I heard laughter. Not loud, but not close, but it was definitely there then. Nothing for a while. I stayed up while Terrence dozed, and it was my turn to sleep. He kept his eyes open and knife in hand. We didn't see Cale again that night, but we never stopped listening. The sun came up slow on us. The fire was long dead, and our limbs were stiff from fear. More than the actual cold. Turin hadn't said much during the night, just grunted occasionally or shifted the knife in his hand. I stayed half curled inside the tent, one boot on eye, scanning the tree line until the black finally bled into the gray. We didn't see Cale again, not that morning, but that only made it worse. Honestly, not knowing where he'd gone to, or if he even really ever left, I dozed off maybe for an hour just before dawn, and when I woke up, Terrence had already tested out his ankle. "All right, it holds," he said, forcing this smile. "It hurts like hell, but it holds." We packed up in silence. Every clink of a can or zip of a bag sounded titanically loud. The woods felt different now in the daylight. It was the same trees and same slope, but it was almost like they were leaning in a little more now, waiting to see what was about to happen to us. I kept checking the shadows for movement, but there really wasn't anything. No sign of Cale, no tracks. No proof he was ever even there. It made me feel completely crazy. The hike out was slow and agonizing. Terrence moved like a man on glass floor, testing each step. I offered to carry his pack, but he refused, said it kept him balanced every time. I turned around to check on him. I expected to see something, or someone behind us, a flicker of a hood, a pale, unexpected face, but it didn't happen. We made it 3 miles in before we saw him again. He was on a ridge line, maybe 100 yards up, just standing there, backlit by the sun. He raised a hand and waved at us like we were old friends parting ways after a barbecue. Then he turned and walked out of sight over the crest, and I never saw him again after that. The rest of the hike was a complete blur. Each mile felt like 5, and I don't remember what we talked about during the process. If we even did, I just remember the ache, the silence, the pressure between my shoulder blades like a crosshair. When we hit the trailhead and saw our car, I nearly burst into tears. I didn't even realize until then they'd been holding my breath until the key turned in the ignition and the engine roared up to life. We didn't call the cops because what would we say? Some weirdo propositioned us in the woods, threw rocks at our tent, then disappeared. He didn't assault us. He didn't lay a hand on either of us. All we had were bad vibes and a name that we couldn't verify. Cale could have easily been fake, and it probably was still. We ended up telling our hiking group what had happened. One of the organizers said he heard of a guy like that before, someone doing weird trail encounters. Up north, a few hours from where we'd actually been made, some women very uncomfortable near Crater Lake. Another story, unconfirmed, but was about a man with a satellite phone who offered favors in exchange for help. But nothing ever really came of it. The guy was a ghost, a drifter, and out there in the forest, that's all it takes to vanish. Just step off the trail. After that, Terrence and I took a break from hiking, a long one. Actually, months passed before we even talked about doing another one. When we finally did, it was car camping inside a well-populated area 10 minutes from the ranger station. I don't think either of us really wanted to say it out loud, but we felt like we'd lost something out there in the woods that night. The trust maybe, and not in one another, but in the idea of nature being safe. That silence used to mean peace. And the worst part, I still think about that night all the time. I'll be in the shower or doing dishes, and suddenly am right back there staring into the trees, wondering if Cale was out there watching us even after he left, wondering if he made a fire of his own, or if he just stood beyond the rise with his hands in his coat pockets, smiling to himself, watching us panic, listening to us whisper about him like he was a monster under our bed. I don't know what would have happened if we would have said yes, if we would have taken that deal. And I think about that sometimes too, if we wouldn't have gotten out of there faster, if he would have actually let us use the phone, or if that was just bait to see what he could get. The way he stared at me, it was like he didn't even see a person, just an opportunity, a transactional thing. It makes me sick to my stomach. But we didn't take the bait. We toughed it out, and we got out of there still. I carry bear spray now, even on the short hikes, and I never camp without a sidearm anymore either. I know what's out there, and funny enough, it's not the bears or the weather that gets you. It's the fucking people. I'm the kind of guy who needs the woods, like other people need coffee in the morning. Some folks unwind with a beer and a recliner. But me, I lace up my boots and load my pack at the dirt before sunrise. I like being out where the cell signal cuts. Out, and the only company is the sound of wind inside the pine needles. No bosses, no bills. The kind of quiet you can really feel in your bones on one summer. I made a project out of knocking out every trail on a map that I pinned above my garage. Workbench, I'd circled them with a red Sharpie as I went local day hikes. Mostly stuff within 2 hours of home that I'd never gotten around to it. It gave me this rhythm: wake up early, toss together a lunch, fill up the hydration bladder, double check the weather, then head out before the sun had fully even gotten. It started for itself. I got so used to the routine that I stopped thinking about it. Went on autopilot, muscle memory. And I think that's what bit me in the ass. It was mid-July, already warm. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, dust kicking up behind my truck, I did a few donuts. No other vehicles, so it was perfect. I stepped out, locked the cab, stretched, and hit the trail with a grin on my face. Something about that morning light through the trees just made me feel like a kid again. I moved fast, burning off my breakfast, eager legs, good weather, not another soul in sight around. 3 miles in, I went to grab my binoculars, and I spotted something up the slope, a hawk, maybe, or a turkey. Vulture. I reached for the strap behind my shoulder and got nothing. My fingers just brushed my shirt. I stopped and patted my sides and turned in this slow circle. No pack. It was still sitting in the back seat of my truck. My water, my food, my phone, charger, everything I needed for the full day out. I walked 3 miles without noticing. I stood there like an idiot, listening to the trees creak and the birds chatter, feeling gummer and gummer by the second. I thought about heading back, right? Then 3 miles isn't really that bad. I wasn't thirsty yet, and the trail wasn't technical. Plus, I'd already committed the morning to this hike. You know what's 1 more mile? I told myself I'd turn around before 5 max. Just make the loop, head home, drink a gallon of water, and maybe even eat a pizza. It didn't seem really that reckless at the time. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't lost. I knew these woods, or at least, so I told myself. I logged hours and hours, looking at them on the map anyway, and that was my mistake. I didn't know shit about where I was or the situation itself. The trail started to zigzag, uphill, switchback after switchback through a patch of scrub pine and brittle. I kept at a steady pace, chest pumping, trying not to think about the water sitting in the cab of my truck. By mile 4, I was really feeling it, the dry mouth, that little knot in my gut that comes from hunger. It hadn't turned to a grumble yet. Still, I'd made it this far, and the loop was just a little further from the elevation and terrain. I knew where the trail was going to double back. I figured I could save some time and distance by cutting straight across one of those wider turns. I've done things like this before tons of times, but I don't really recommend it unless you know what you're doing. But I did it, or at least I thought that I did. I stepped off the trail into a patch of dense trees where I could see the other leg of the trail, maybe 300 yards below. Just a quick off-road hop, nothing too wild about. Halfway through that thicket, though the ground dipped sharply, I slowed down, took careful steps around the brambles and half-dead limbs that had twisted like bones in the dirt. And that's when I saw it, something laid out for display: climbing gear, real stuff, ropes, harnesses, carabiners, all of it weather-beaten and split over this flat slab of rock like somebody set it up. And thin. Just walked away mid-project, and then I saw the hole. It was just a head, maybe 15 feet wide, almost perfectly rectangular. The mouth of the thing looked like it had been carved into the earth with purpose. Went straight down, maybe 15 feet at the opening, before darkness swallowed up the rest. What really caught my eye, though, were the anchors bolted into the boulders around the rim. Old, but solid. A few still had webbing and rope tied off like they've been used not that long ago. There were even a pair of climbing boots lying near the side of a beat-up old haul bag and a shitload of bloody gauze. And medical tape. I stepped closer, looking around for anybody, but the woods remained quiet and still overwhelmingly. So hello, I called out, my voice bouncing off the trees, and then disappeared. I got no response. I crouched next to one of the harnesses. It was sun-faded and dry, but the wear didn't look ancient, a year old maybe. 2 at most, same with the ropes weathered, but not rotted, and they were still deployed into the pit. Someone had gone down there. I stood over the edge and looked. And the light didn't go far, just a few feet below the lip, and the interior opened up into layers of rock plates, like a jagged stairwell spiraling off into the darkness. It was climbable if you had the guts and the gear, and I had neither, but I did have a phone. I pulled it from my pocket, flipped on the flashlight, and shined it off into the void. The beam bounced off the nearest rock shelf, then the one below, and vanished off into the blackness. I didn't like the way the hole seemed to breathe. Not literally, of course, but standing near it gave me that same feeling that you get on the edge of a tall cliffs, like something that wants to pull you in, but still curiosity is a fucking bastard. I sat and lowered myself onto the first plate and climbed down. The rocks were dry and flat, like the inside of a mine that hadn't seen water in years. I moved slowly, testing each ledge. Before actually trusting it, 30 feet down, the light from above started to thin out. The trees were now a distant memory, just a jagged ring of blue sky above me. There were more ropes down here, anchors too, wedged into cracks, bolted into natural seams. Somebody had been here, worked their way down, just like I was doing now. I figured maybe it's some forgotten cave system, maybe used by climbers years ago until it fell out of rotation. And that made sense, mostly as I'm thinking all of this to myself. I hear a sound, and not an echo of my own movement. Not the wind, and not shifting rocks. A voice. It was soft and close, and all I heard was one word: hey. My spine immediately went stiff. The word was flat and casual, like a greeting between 2 people passing on the sidewalk. It hadn't come from above, and it hadn't come from below. It came from somewhere. Right beside me, I spun, jerking with my hands, sweeping rock and rope and emptiness. Nothing, just the walls around me. Just the anchor bolts. Just the breath in my lungs. Now going shallow. Hello, I said again, but I didn't get a response. I turned. The light below me, still nothing but black, but my legs were not responding. My fingers were slick, and I don't know how long I stood, their heart pounding, trying to convince myself that I imagined that a trick of the acoustics, my own voice bouncing. Weird, anything, but the thing, it really sounded like somebody else was down here with me. Hey, it had said, not help, not hello, just hey, like you've been waiting for me to notice them. I climbed fast and sloppy. My foot even slipped once, scraping the side of a ledge, but I didn't stop. I didn't look down. I just clawed my way up until daylight kissed the rim and launched myself out like the earth was trying to suck me back in. I lay on my back for a minute, lungs burning, staring up at the trees, the sunlight, at anything that wasn't a black hole. Then I got up and ran. No trail shortcuts this time. I stuck to the switchbacks all the way down, legs trembling, mouth dry as sand. When I finally reached my truck, I tore the door open and chugged the water from my backpack bottle, and thanked God for it. I sat there for a long time, breathing, trying to just believe that I imagined it all, that it was nothing. But even then, even as I drove back to town, I could not shake that voice, that one single word. I made the call later that afternoon once. The adrenaline wore off, and I stopped second-guessing myself. I didn't mention the voice. I just told the ranger station. There was a collection of climbing gear, about 4 and 12 meters, up on the East Loop Trail. Off a switchback, told them the ropes were still rigged. There's still a hole in the ground, possibly an open cave. I figured they'd take it seriously, maybe send a couple of guys out tape. it off all the stuff out for inspection. Whatever their protocol is, the ranger that I spoke to didn't sound too surprised, though he listened, asked a few of his own questions about the location, gear condition, if there was a smell. Then he gave me this small sigh through the other end of the line. Yeah, he said, we get a call about that setup every once in a while. It's been there a long time. How long, I asked him. I'm not really sure. Been here 9 years, and it was old when I started. We leave it there as kind of a warning deterrent for amateur climbers, really. You don't know who it belonged to. Nope, I think we did at one point. I'm sure records get lost, though it's just one of those things. You know, kind of becomes part of the trail itself, and that last part really stuck with me, part of the trail, like moss, or rust, or the way the wind sounds. In certain spots, just another feature of the land, ignored until somebody stumbles into it. I didn't say anything else, didn't mention the voice, or how it was right there close enough to touch. Didn't mention the way the ropes looked ready to be used. Not forgotten, some part of me knew how that would sound to him, though. Like I was dehydrated, maybe hallucinating, or worse, just trying to spin up some backwards legend for internet clout. But to me, it wasn't just a story. For days after I couldn't stop thinking about it, I'd be at work or in the garage, and I'd hear it again, flat and emotionless, right behind my ear. Hey, it didn't come with fear at the time, but that was the worst part. The voice wasn't desperate or angry or lost. It was casual, patient almost. I stopped hiking solo for quite a while after that, and not even ashamed to admit it, I started double and triple checking my gear before leaving the driveway. Even took a buddy out there a few times with me months later and tried to find the same spot, and I couldn't do it. Not exactly. At least the trail had grown over in places, and none of the switchbacks looked right to me. He thought I was exaggerating, making up shit. Said maybe I wandered further than I remembered, maybe. But I know what I saw, and more than that, I know what I heard. Something is down there, whether it's a person or a thing or an echo of somebody who went too deep and never came back. I don't know, but what I do know is this: when the earth opens up like that, when rocks make room for something they were never meant to hold, you don't hang around and ask questions. You get the fuck out of there while you still have the chance. I spent the better part of 12 years as a Boy Scout leader in Southern California, Troop 214, based out of a sleepy town wedged between the hills and the desert. We had our fair share of lazy, merit badge weekends and gear check-in Tuesdays, but what we really lived for were the backcountry trips, camping, kayaking, night hikes, cooking on a tiny backpacking stove while coyotes howled out in the distance. Those were the moments that made all the other crap worth it. I had two co-leaders, Sam and Carrie, both rock-solid guys, and we really made a hell of a team. Sam had this easygoing way with the younger kids, and Carrie was the detail guy. Gear checks, trail permits, maps, printed out and laminated like he was prepping for a military op. And me, I was somewhere in the middle of the two. I kept the group moving, kept them motivated. I also foot the bill pretty much all the time, so spring trips were our favorite. Warm enough to ditch the thermal bags and cool enough to keep the flies down. Every March or April, we take the troop out to explore some lesser-used trails and spend a few nights underneath the stars. The year this story takes place, the plan was to do a big loop through the canyon system, about 2 hours from town. A trail I'd even hiked before. Gorgeous place. 2 steep red walls, a creek that twisted like ribbons through the rock, little pools where you could cool your feet off, giant stone formations that looked like open-air amphitheaters, crystals littering the path. Like trash the thing was, though. Both Sam and Carrie came down with a bug almost a day before. Nothing life-threatening, just enough to knock them out of commission. Honestly, probably should have called it off right then and there, but I didn't. And a chunk of kids had already dropped off from that same flu going around. I figured with only 13 boys making the trip, I could handle it by myself. I'd led hikes before, done solo overnights in tougher places than this. I was cocky. I was also optimistic. which in this case is kind of a dangerous combination. So I packed the boys into our old white activity bus, that lumbering tin can with the peeling troop sticker on the side. Rolled out that Friday morning. The trailhead was empty when we pulled. In dirt dust and a pit toilet that hadn't seen a cleaning crew in at least a month. The boys were buzzing though, tossing their packs on and adjusting their poles, while I double-checked everything else had water maps, radio, head count, all that stuff. I gave our quick safety talk and reminded them to stay on the trail, stay with inside of me, do not go wandering off, just because a shiny rock catches your eye. Then we set off under a cloudless blue sky, and everything felt so right, the boys were. Loud and happy, the trail was dry and clear, and I kept thinking to myself, this is going to be one for the books. The canyon opened up around the first bend walls, climbing higher on either side. Like something out of a fantasy novel, the boys were. Having the time of their lives joking, snapping pictures, yelling echoes into a rock. To hear them bounce back, we were moving at a good clip, two stopping often enough to poke. Around creek beds and out some strange stones, one of the kids, Parker I think, found a small geode and lost his mind completely over it. That sparked that usual rock fever, and before long most of them were walking with their heads down, scanning for crystals themselves. We hiked deep into the canyon, maybe 5 or 6 miles. Before I called it for lunch break, found a flat area along a river where they could ditch their packs and soak their feet, eat some peanut butter sandwiches. Spirits were high. I was sweating through my shirt, but otherwise things were going pretty smooth. No injuries, no whining, no lost gear. Right, boys? I told them 10-minute break, then we're going to start climbing out to the ridge line. Stay within earshot. A few of them nodded back to me. One kid, Lucas, raised his hand and said he had a pee. I pointed toward a bushy slope just off the trail and told him again to stay. Visible, another kid, Ethan, was already chasing some crystal veins up a dry wash, crouched and humming to himself. I saw him, and I should have called him back. I should have made them all stay put as we moved as a group, but I didn't. 2 minutes later, the scream came, not a yell, not a shout, an honest to God blood curdling scream, full-throated and panicked. I quickly jumped to my feet. The boys froze mid-bite, heads whipping. Toward the source of the sound, Ethan came tearing out of the tree's arms, flailing eyes wide and wild. "Sigh it," he shrieked. They were everywhere. They came out of the rocks. They're biting at me. He stumbled back into the group, shaking, and then collapsed. To his knees, I scanned the tree line, the brush, the slope behind us. At first, I didn't see anything, just stillness. Then I heard that high pitch, yipping, 1 at first, then 3, then what sounded like a full pack joining in on it, echoing through the canyon and waves. Coyotes weren't new. We'd seen them many times before. They usually kept their distance. Maybe 1 or 2 would show up at camp. See if somebody left a bag of food out or something. They never attacked, though not unless rabid or cornered. But this time, the sound itself was even off. The yips were growing closer, sharper. I saw the first pair of eyes behind the low mosquito, then another behind a scrub oak, then 6, maybe 8. It's hard to count when they were moving and weaving through brush in short bursts. I shouted for the boys to get up. Sticks. I yelled, "Everybody, grab something, get close together, tight." Now they obey, bless them. I grabbed the branch, the size of a baseball bat, dry and thick with knots, and the boys followed suit, holding their makeshift clubs ready for war. Some were crying, terrified, and rightly so. Others were shaking far too scared to speak. I stepped in front of them, ready to go at it. I counted at least 15 coyotes, then circling just behind the first. Trees way too close for that amount. They were remaining quiet, watching us, ears perked and tails stiff. These weren't scavengers sniffing for scraps. These were pissed-off animals, looking to settle a score. One of the boys must have stumbled into their den, and now they were neutralizing the threat. I waved the branch around, shouting for them to get back. The alpha, or what I assumed was the alpha, stepped closer. Teeth bared, a long scar ran across his snout. It growled long as hell, like a warning to me, and I'd never seen anything like that. Not that close, and not with zero hesitation. They were waiting for some kind of weakness, and that much was clear to me. "All right," I said, turning to the boys. "We're going to move slowly, tight formation. No running if one of them charges. You swing hard and loud. Do not break any rank." We started backing up step by step. Very carefully, the trailhead was 5 miles behind us, but it might as well have been 50 in the moment. My arms ached from keeping that branch raised. Every few yards, a new burst of yips would go up, signaling to one another, almost like they were calling in more. One darted in from the left fast as a bullet. I swung hard and hit it mid-air. It yelped and rolled and limped back to the tree line. The others didn't even flinch. If anything, they moved closer. My heart was hammering like a drum in my throat. "Do not stop," I said. "Keep walking. He'll stay on point." And that's what I did for miles. The trail curved along the canyon wall, forcing us to narrow ledges and rocky incline. The coyotes flanked us that whole way, snapping twigs, kicking up dust. One of the younger boys, Henry, took a neep on the calf. It wasn't deep, but enough to make him scream. I pulled him forward and shouted so loud that my voice cracked. They didn't let up for 3 solid hours. I led my group of boys like a battered old general marching through enemy territory. I took swipes, yelled, threatened, begged, but I never felt brave. I felt cornered. I felt like prey. By the time we saw the trailhead sign, I almost cried. The parking lot remained empty and silent, sunbaked, not a soul in sight. Those coyotes followed us right to the tree line. The moment the lock came into view, the boys broke. They didn't wait for me to say a word. They just ran, packs, bouncing sticks, forgotten feet pounding against the gravel. I didn't stop them this time. I was right behind, limping from a low swipe. One of the coyotes had landed near my shin. It barely tore my pants, but it left a welt like a branding iron. I was bleeding and didn't even notice until now. It did not follow us past the trees. The whole pack just stood there, tail stiff, not retreating, but not advancing either, just watching us. I turned once at the edge of the lot and saw them. I think there was 30 of them by then, lined up between the trunks like spectators. Ears flat now. They weren't winded. They weren't afraid. They looked satisfied, like we've been punished. Just enough pushed out of their territory. Like the varmint that we were, we piled back into the bus. In a mess of panic breathing, I slammed the door, turned the key with shaky hands, not from fear now, but from real exhaustion. The engine roared as we backed out, and the boys remained silent behind. Me, a few sniffles, a few glances behind, thankful to get going and leave that hellhole behind. US, though not one of them even asked what happened to us back there, and we didn't stop until I hit the edge of town. I radioed ahead to meet a few of the parents at the scout hall, helped bandage Henry's leg, and handed out water and granola bars. None of the kids were seriously hurt. Thank God, just scratches and a couple of bruises. One sprained wrist from a bad fall off a slope, but their eyes. My God, I think I gave these children PTSD. I filed a wildlife incident report, same as always, but the ranger that I talked to really just shook his head like you didn't believe a word. I was saying, coyotes, coyotes, that many of them, are you sure? I counted more than 20. I said they surrounded us. They followed us for miles. He tapped the desk with his pen. We've had sightings, sure, but they're usually scared of humans, especially in groups, especially loud ones. Well, I responded, not this time. He continued on with whatever took down the report, and that was that. Never heard anything else. I still lead meetings, hand out badges, and teach. Not all that stuff, but I haven't taken a troop out solo since then, not even once. If Sam and Carrie aren't there, we would cancel. No more exceptions. I've got no pride left when it comes to being the guy who thinks he can handle it all himself. That's how people get hurt, or worse, because out in those woods, 13 kids and one idiotic leader were shown the door. We got to come back, but just barely, by the skin of coyote teeth.